The second you terminate all interaction and remain completely out of reach, a fundamental shift occurs within their psychological framework. It is not an emotional break in the way a healthy person understands it, but a psychological snap. By withdrawing, you have effectively dismantled their mirror, and a narcissist simply cannot operate without that external reflection. They do not process the end of a connection the way balanced people do. They do not move on, they react, they spiral, and they calculate. What follows is a remarkably consistent and predictable sequence of events. If this is hitting home, take a moment to subscribe, because mastering this psychology is how you maintain your independence rather than remaining in a state of reaction. When an extended period of no contact begins, the narcissist does not perceive it as a loss in the sentimental or emotional sense that most would imagine. There is no legitimate grief, no true heartbreak, and no thoughtful sadness regarding what went wrong in the relationship. Instead, what is triggered is something far more destabilizing to their core: a total loss of control. Control is the fundamental currency of a narcissist's internal world. Attention, reactions, emotional access, and even intense conflict are all different forms of supply that serve to confirm their relevance and their dominance over you. When you remove yourself entirely and maintain your silence, you aren't just exiting the relationship, you are collapsing the entire system that kept them regulated and balanced. Your absence creates a sudden and jarring power vacuum. They lose the ability to read your thoughts, provoke your emotions, correct the narrative to suit them, or extract any form of reassurance from your reactions. That silence becomes an unsolvable problem for their mind. In the early stages, their brain searches for the familiar levers they used to pull. They replay past interactions not to gain understanding or empathy, but to locate specific influence points. This is why no contact feels so abrasive and jarring to them. They are accustomed to pressing a button and receiving an immediate response. Silence offers them absolutely no feedback loop. The brain of a narcissist is hardwired specifically around external validation. So when that feedback disappears, their anxiety spikes. That anxiety quickly transforms into irritation and then evolves into a cold rage, because rage feels far more powerful to them than helplessness. What might look like missing you from an outside perspective is actually just intense frustration at losing access to you. They do not miss your actual presence, they miss your availability. They miss the security of knowing they can still affect your emotional state. This is exactly why they may begin to test your boundaries with indirect actions like watching your digital footprint, asking mutual acquaintances about you, or making symbolic gestures intended to provoke your curiosity or trigger your guilt. Each of these attempts is a probe, a way to see if the old control can be reestablished. The longer the no contact lasts, the clearer the message becomes to them. They no longer possess any authority over your emotional world. That realization is deeply and fundamentally threatening to a narcissistic identity. Without that control, their self-image begins to destabilize because they define themselves almost entirely through their impact on other people. Your silence doesn't communicate anger or simple rejection. It communicates independence. And independence is the one thing a narcissist cannot tolerate, because it proves they are no longer central, no longer necessary, and no longer in command of the situation. Silence feels like a total rejection to a narcissist, because their sense of self is built almost entirely on external feedback. They do not carry a stable internal identity the way emotionally healthy people do. Instead, they regulate their self-worth through the attention, reactions, validation, and emotional engagement they get from others. When you go no contact and stay silent, that stream of energy abruptly shuts off. To a narcissist, silence is never neutral, and it is never seen as peaceful. It is interpreted as a mix of dismissal, abandonment, and humiliation all at once. In their mind, being ignored is the equivalent of being devalued. Even negative attention feels better to them than none at all, because anger, confrontation, and drama still confirm their significance. Silence, however, offers no proof that they even matter. There is no emotional echo for them to orient themselves around. This creates a sharp and painful internal discomfort because they are forced to face something they avoid at all costs: the possibility that they are no longer important in your world. What makes this even worse is that narcissists are highly attuned to social hierarchy. They are constantly scanning their environment for signs of dominance and submission. When you stop responding, explaining, defending, or reacting, the power dynamic flips entirely. They are no longer the ones choosing the distance. The distance is being imposed on them. That loss of perceived status is experienced as a deep rejection, even if you never said a single word. This is why silence often provokes much stronger reactions than a direct confrontation. Arguments still allow them to feel engaged, superior, or influential in your life. Silence removes the battlefield entirely. There is nothing left for them to win, no role for them to play, and no audience for them to perform for. Internally, this triggers a wave of shame, but shame is intolerable for a narcissist. So instead of processing it, they convert it into anger, contempt, or fantasies of retaliation. They may tell themselves that you are being immature, cruel, or weak for disappearing, but that narrative exists only to protect their ego. Beneath it is a deeper truth they cannot admit. Your silence proves they no longer control access to you. And for a narcissist, rejection is never about losing love. It is about losing relevance. Your lack of response becomes undeniable evidence that their presence is no longer required in your life. And that realization cuts deeper than any insult you could ever throw at them. After a long period of no contact, narcissists often move through a very predictable internal cycle of confusion, rage, and calculation. It doesn't always happen in a clean or linear order, and it doesn't always show on the surface. But psychologically, the pattern is remarkably consistent. At first, confusion sets in because your silence disrupts every expectation they have. They are used to predictable reactions, even if those reactions are emotional, defensive, or angry. When none of those arrive, their mind struggles to process the sudden absence of feedback. They keep waiting for the moment you will break, reach out, or respond to them. When that moment doesn't come, a sense of uncertainty takes over. That confusion quickly hardens into a cold rage. This rage is not always explosive or obvious to the outside world. Sometimes it's quiet, cold, and entirely internal. What fuels it is the realization that they no longer control the narrative or your emotional state. They may feel deeply insulted, disrespected, or challenged, even though no direct challenge occurred. The rage exists because silence forces them to confront their own helplessness, and helplessness is intolerable to their ego. Anger feels more powerful than vulnerability, so their mind chooses it automatically. Once that rage stabilizes, the calculation begins. This is where the narcissist shifts from emotional reaction to strategic thinking. They start asking themselves how to regain their leverage, not how to repair the actual relationship. They consider different tactics based on what has worked on you before. Charm, guilt, intimidation, triangulation, or playing the victim all become tools on the table once again. Every single move is measured by one question: will this get a reaction? During this phase, they may appear calm or even indifferent on the outside, but internally, they are running endless scenarios. Should they reach out directly or wait? Should they pretend they've moved on to provoke your jealousy? Should they smear your reputation to protect their own image? Each option is evaluated solely for its ability to restore, control, or at least preserve their sense of superiority. If none of these strategies succeed, their frustration deepens further. They may retreat temporarily, telling themselves they are done with you. But this withdrawal is rarely about finding closure. It is about regrouping and finding a new angle. The cycle can repeat indefinitely if they sense even the smallest opening. Long no contact breaks this cycle, not by defeating them in battle, but by starving the cycle of energy. Without feedback, their confusion has nowhere to go. Their rage has no target, and their calculation becomes entirely pointless. Ego injury is the real wound that gets exposed after long no contact, and it cuts far deeper than most people realize. A narcissist's ego is not built on confidence, strength, or self-belief. It is a fragile psychological structure built specifically to protect them from deep-seated shame. Everything they do, the charm, the control, the manipulation, the image management, exists to prevent one unbearable feeling from surfacing, the feeling of being insignificant. When you go silent and stay gone, that protection cracks wide open. No contact sends a powerful message without using a single word. It says, "You no longer define my emotional reality." To a narcissist, this feels like an attack on their identity itself. Their self-image depends on being central, influential, and unforgettable. When you remove yourself, they experience it as a collapse of their status. They are no longer the authority and no longer the one who decides when the connection begins or ends. That loss of dominance creates a massive ego injury. Ego injury is not the same as sadness. It is a cocktail of humiliation mixed with helplessness. The narcissist feels exposed, diminished, and replaced in your life. Even if no replacement actually exists, they begin to obsess over how they are being perceived by you and others. Are you happier now? Have you forgotten them already? Do others finally see through them? These thoughts create internal chaos because their value system depends entirely on external validation. Without your attention, their internal balance destabilizes. This injury often produces extreme reactions. Some narcissists will lash out aggressively, attempting to reassert their superiority through insults, threats, or smear campaigns. Others will retreat into a state of cold contempt, convincing themselves that you were unworthy of them or beneath them all along. This is not true indifference. It is psychological self-defense. They must downgrade you in their mind to survive the blow to their ego. What makes ego injury so dangerous for them is that it cannot be repaired internally. Healthy people process rejection by reflecting, adjusting, and growing. Narcissists cannot do this because admitting any fault would shatter their false self. So instead of healing, they externalize the blame. You become the cruel one. You become the heartless one. You become the problem. This allows them to protect their image while avoiding any accountability. Long no contact keeps that injury open and raw. Every day of silence reinforces the truth they cannot escape. You chose peace over them, and that choice proves they are not as powerful, necessary, or irreplaceable as they believed. That realization is the deepest wound of all. After long no contact, narcissists often shift into a phase of distant monitoring before they ever take direct action. This stage is quiet, subtle, and very easy to misunderstand. On the surface, it may look like they've finally moved on. In reality, they are watching, not out of care or nostalgia, but out of surveillance. Monitoring allows them to gather information without risking another rejection or further ego injury. It gives them a sense of control without any exposure. During this phase, they may check your social media obsessively, ask mutual connections, indirect questions, or track changes in your life through third parties. They are scanning for emotional data. Are you struggling or are you thriving? Do you seem happier or quieter? Are you talking about them or acting completely unaffected? Every detail is interpreted as evidence of whether they still matter to you. This observation phase helps them regulate their anxiety while they decide their next move. What's important to understand is that they are not looking for closure. They are looking for leverage. If they sense vulnerability, sadness, or lingering attachment, it reassures them that they still have influence. If they see growth, peace, or indifference, it unsettles them deeply. Indifference is especially threatening because it suggests a permanent loss of control. When they see no emotional signal at all, it forces them to confront the possibility that they are no longer relevant. This is why they often delay reaching out. Acting too soon risks confirmation that they've been replaced or forgotten. Waiting allows them to build a narrative in their head. They may tell themselves, "You are just pretending to be fine," or that you'll eventually break. These assumptions help them preserve superiority while they observe from a safe distance. Monitoring also serves the function of protecting their image. By staying quiet, they can later claim they were the ones who disengaged, that they were unbothered, or that they chose distance for their own reasons. This narrative matters deeply to them, especially in social environments where reputation equals power. If they eventually act, it is usually calculated and not emotional. The move is based on what they think will produce the strongest reaction with the least risk. Long no contact disrupts this phase by offering absolutely no data. When there is nothing to observe and no emotional trail to follow, their monitoring becomes pointless. And when observation fails, control slips further away, leaving them frustrated, uncertain, and exposed. As time passes and no contact remains unbroken, hoovering attempts don't disappear. They evolve. Early attempts are often impulsive and obvious, driven by panic or irritation. But after long no contact, narcissists become much more strategic. They learn that direct approaches may fail, so they adjust their tactics to bypass your defenses without triggering an immediate rejection. This is where their behavior can feel confusing, subtle, and even harmless on the surface. Strategic hoovering is designed to look low risk. Instead of emotional declarations, you may see neutral messages, practical questions, or accidental encounters. They might reference shared history casually, send something that appears unrelated, or show concern without any real commitment. The goal is not reconciliation. The goal is simple engagement. Any response, even a cold one, confirms that access still exists. Once access is re-established, control can slowly be rebuilt. Another common shift is indirect hoovering. They may use third parties to pass along information or create curiosity. Mutual connections might mention them out of nowhere, or you may hear that they are struggling, changing, or doing exceptionally well. These narratives are planted intentionally. They are meant to trigger your empathy, guilt, jealousy, or self-doubt, emotions that reopen psychological doors without direct contact. Timing also becomes very deliberate. They may wait for moments when you are more likely to be vulnerable, such as anniversaries, holidays, birthdays, or periods of visible stress or success. Success is just as triggering to them as hardship because it threatens their ego. Reaching out during these moments allows them to test whether they still hold any emotional weight in your life. What makes long-term hoovering dangerous is that it often mimics maturity. They may appear calm, respectful, and even self-aware, but this is not growth, it is adaptation. Narcissists learn patterns the way strategists do. If chaos no longer works, they try composure. If charm failed before, they try neutrality. The core motive remains unchanged: regain relevance and influence. If these refined tactics fail, frustration intensifies. Each unanswered attempt reinforces the same message no contact has been sending all along. Access is permanently revoked. At that point, hoovering either escalates into hostility or collapses into withdrawal. Long no contact is effective not because it changes them, but because it removes every incentive for their behavior. When strategy yields no reward, even the most calculated attempts eventually lose momentum. When narcissists can no longer regain control after long no contact, they don't sit with the truth of what happened. They rewrite the story entirely. This is not lying in the casual sense. It is psychological survival. Their mind cannot tolerate a narrative where they were rejected, powerless, or responsible for the collapse. So reality is edited until it no longer threatens their existence. This final adjustment of reality, the narcissist crafts a version of events where they are the victor or the victim, but never the villain. They might tell themselves and anyone who will listen that they were the ones who finally walked away, or that your silence is proof of your instability and lack of character. This creative editing is essential because the truth that you outgrew the need for their validation is a psychological death blow. They will cling to this revised history with absolute conviction, because admitting the reality would mean acknowledging their own insignificance in your life. As the days of no contact turn into months and years, The silence acts as a permanent barrier. It is no longer a temporary tactic, but a new way of existing that excludes them entirely. The narcissist eventually realizes that no amount of monitoring, hoovering, or rage will bridge the gap you've created. This leads to a final, albeit shallow, form of detachment. They don't let go because they've healed. They let go because there is no more energy to harvest. They will likely seek out a new source of supply, someone whose reactions are still predictable and whose mirror is still intact. But even as they move on to a new target, the memory of your silence remains a dormant scar on their ego. It is the one puzzle they could never solve, and the one battle they could never win. By staying gone, you haven't just protected your peace. You have fundamentally altered the power dynamic forever. You have proven that their influence was always a temporary illusion that relied on your participation. Without your engagement, they are forced to exist in a world where they are just another person, rather than the central figure. Your continued silence